Hello and welcome. It's my pleasure to present to you from India this paper titled Social Practice in Communicating Traditional Knowledge, a study of tribal communities from Kolli Hill in Tamil Nadu, which is in South India. To take you very briefly through the introduction on traditional knowledge, we have a lot of emphasis being placed on traditional knowledge now, simply because in the context of climate change and malnutrition, there is a perception that traditional grains, for instance, or agrobiodiversity conservation can help in combating or dealing with some of these present generation issues. What you see on the slide are pictures of millets. Millets, in fact, are considered some of the crops of the future simply because they are climate smart. They use very little water and they can be a great source of nutrition for people who are most at needs. The place where traditional knowledge is housed is mostly in tribal communities. A lot of work has happened among tribal communities, but a lot of the work involves working with communities to understand what knowledge is actually housed within them. So the importance of traditional knowledge has focused on documentation, it has focused on trying to understand what people have and to create a resource of this knowledge. The International Union for Conservation of Nature has mentioned that biocultural diversity is relevant for conservation as well as for sustainability. So while there is growing interest in traditional knowledge, however, the indiscriminate use of a lot of resources, for example, say pharmaceuticals or herbal medicine or certain crops that have medicinal properties, has also led to them being destroyed. It needs to be understood that traditional knowledge has survived for so long simply because the communities have protected it, and for them it is a part of their life. This is why we need to shift, as Ferguson et al. Suggest, that we need to shift from focusing just on the knowledge or just focusing on the conservation to focusing on the practice. That is, focusing on why or how this knowledge has been sustained for generations together. Coming to the component of culture and communication. For traditional knowledge, the culture, ritual, social practices, a lot of social events that happened within the community were all ways in which the knowledge was actually preserved. It was consciously or unconsciously done, but the fact is that these rituals and these cultural practices helped preserve the traditional knowledge in a much better way, and that too within the community. In fact, many natural habitats have been preserved simply because the communities had certain social norms and laws that forced them or that made them have involved in this conservation. What is known as biocultural diversity, as the IUCN recognizes, is something that is relevant for conservation and for sustainability. So the cultural diversity is important for conservation and for traditional knowledge itself. To point out the study location, this study was conducted in the Kolli Hills region of Tamil Nadu in South India. This is a region which is an abode of tribal communities, which is predominantly over 90% of the communities here are tribal communities. If you look at the image, the satellite image of the region, you will see that it is lush green. The reason it is lush green is also because the communities have certain rules and laws by which they say forests that they call sacred forests should not be disturbed. The community should not cut trees, they should not use them for their personal or professional or any other financial benefit, but they should just protect them. This is not through any government structure or through any law, but through a community norm. It's a beautiful practice, and as a result of it, you can see how green that entire region is. This is one of the ways in which conservation has been happening. Moving on, we look now at some of the typical tribal communities that live in this region. These are Malayali communities. Malayali means a person living on the hill, and these communities are considered even pre-Harappan. They have a long history and tradition behind them. So history says that they belong to a pre-Harappan era, and a lot of the knowledge they possess is from that era as well. To reach there, it's quite adventurous because you have to go up 72 hairpin bends, and by the time you reach that stomach lurching top, you wonder whether you'll actually be able to make it. But when you reach, it's really, really interesting because it's such a beautiful place and so well conserved from all the points of view of nature as well as conservation. Coming to the aims and objectives of this particular study, It is really to look at pathways for communicating traditional knowledge, traditional wisdom and indigenous cultural biodiversity through opinion leaders called Urgaunders among this community. An Urgounder is somebody who is like a local community leader. He is not an elected representative, but he is somebody who is considered by the community to be a key influencer and someone who dictates all their important decisions. The research questions include: what is the role of the cultural practices in the conservation? What is the role played by the local and community leaders in this particular process, and how traditional knowledge is actually preserved and conserved within the community? The theoretical framework uses social practice theory and looks at three components, which is competencies, materials and meanings. And so this is related directly to the people, the kind of competencies that exist or are perceived to exist, what are the materials that are actually helping in the conservation, and what is the meaning that people ascribe to these rituals or to these practices. The field study involved a field research methodology, focus group discussions, in-depth interviews and qualitative methods such as interacting with the people, observation and looking at what was really important to them in the village of Thovarapallam and Naduvalaivu, which are in Kolli Hills in Tamil Nadu. So looking at what the people actually said, the key aspects that were covered in this looked at understanding first the agricultural practices. So essentially, since this study focused on agrobiodiversity conservation with regard to millets and the way that they are actually preserved through traditions, this study looked at how the agricultural practices and knowledge sharing happens within the community. What is it that they do to get information, and what is it they do to share this information? They also looked at how exploration of the lives and the changes in their lives, for example, urbanization or influences from the government or from other corporate or for non-profit organizations has made a change in these traditional communication patterns. And we are also looking at what are some of the aspects that help in reinforcing this cultivation, conservation and consumption practices. So what are these practices? Some of these practices include, for instance, there is one ritual called an Urmugatam. So this is a process by which at the start of the cropping season, the Urgounder, as was mentioned earlier, the influential community leader, selects the desired crop varieties that are supposed to be grown during the coming season. It is felt that he knows which are the best varieties to be selected. It is usually a male who is the influential community leader, and this decision is followed by the rest of the community. How does this help? This helps because people automatically end up conserving or using those particular crop varieties in their season, and it also includes a large component of millets. The other one is also Ponneru, where through a plough, which is taken symbolically to the field, the starting of the agricultural season is indicated. And the third is also custodian farmers. Custodian farmers are those that preserve traditional grains from one generation to another. So it's handed down from to the next generation, and it's preserved in the form of very simple implements that can be found from within the community. So you see here in this picture, there is a picture of this traditional urn which actually houses the grain. So there is no hi-fi refrigeration process or no other technology involved, but there are very simple methods like using clay or using urns or using a triple layered storage system that the community can manage to use this. So coming to the concept of Urgaunders. So the Urgounder who are usually a married elderly person who commands respect and a lot of privilege within his community. So he is seen as somebody who is politically as well as socially acceptable. So this is an interaction with an Urgounder that took place in this village called Naduvalaivu. The other influence of this Urgounder is also understood from within the community. Everybody agrees that this Urgounder is very influential and has a lot of respect. However, a lot of people who have had in-family migration, that is the children have moved to cities or that they have started moving to cash crops, feel that this influence of the Urgounder is diminishing. So although they do look up to him, they do not necessarily follow everything that he says in agricultural patterns. And the traditional practices such as conserving the grains exist within a lot of families, and the families that actually continue this tradition use these traditional grains more than families that have stopped using this tradition, that have stopped following this ritual of conserving the grains. So the results overall found that in terms of competencies, the perceived or the actual or the existing competency of the community leader or the Urgounder is a very important factor in realizing whether the traditional knowledge is sustained within the community or not. Whether additional sources of information such as mass media and other urban methods of communication are available, that also has an influence. With regard to material, the availability or non-availability of inputs, mostly seeds and the different seed varieties, is a very important aspect to understand whether nutritious varieties of these particular cereals are conserved or not. So wherever families have stopped the traditional practice, they are unable to go back to the nutritional millet varieties. However, families that have the material, that have the input, are able to get engaged in the conservation. Meanings in terms of those who have actually ascribed a very high value or ascribed a high value to the traditional practices, they do believe and they do conserve much more than those who haven't actually followed the meaning, or those who believe that the meaning is not so relevant in this day and age. So depending on that, the rituals, whether it's the community ritual, the village ritual or the family ritual, these rituals get a much better meaning. There is a much better conservation and traditional knowledge is housed within the community in situ. In conclusion, through the field notes taking and various group discussions held with the community members, it is evident that there is a high level of importance among the tribal communities studied on the traditional knowledge that they possess, as well as on a lot of rituals that the communities have, social customs, cultural practices, and a lot of other methods of sharing information that is housed within the community. However, we do need more detailed behavior change interventions to understand whether by reinforcing these social and cultural practices, it is possible to reinforce the traditional knowledge in a much stronger way. So this is what is recommended as a further pathway for research. Thank you very much, and for any further information, we'd be happy to respond. And I'm missing out on all the social events at the conference here, but I do hope that this is our way of actually sharing and being part of this wonderful conference that IAMCR organizes every year. Thank you very much, and look forward to be a part of this vibrant community.